Billionaire accidentally marries his secretary. Overnight, fake love turns real welcome. Dear viewers, we're so thrilled you've joined us on this incredible journey through love, heartache, and redemption. This story, filled with twists, emotions, and unspoken connections, is one that you won't forget. Damien and Nia's journey is not just a story of love. It's a testament to the power of second chances, the strength of the human heart, and the transformative power of true love. By watching this story till the very end, you'll experience the kind of love that triumphs over adversity, that heals deep wounds, and that proves true love really does conquer all. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to witness how love can change everything. You won't regret taking this ride with them, because the ending will leave you not only speechless, but believing in the magic of second chances. Trust us. This is the kind of story that stays with you long after the screen fades. Are you ready for the unforgettable finale? Let's dive in. Double asterisk. Damien Wolfe sat behind the massive glass desk that dominated the heart of Wolfe Enterprises, his piercing blue eyes cold as ice, scanning the resumes on his tablet without a hint of warmth until he reached one that made him pause, though he quickly masked any flicker of emotion. Nia Morgan, bright, overqualified, energetic, her credentials screamed brilliance. Yet when she walked into his office for the interview, wearing a simple navy dress that hugged her curvy figure and with a radiant smile that lit the room, Damien's heart tensed with a cold unfamiliarity. Because her presence was magnetic, yet her skin color triggered an ugly bias he buried deep within himself, a prejudice inherited from an upbringing he never questioned. But he forced a tight smile and extended a handshake colder than steel, while Nia, unaware of the storm raging behind his icy gaze, shook his hand firmly, her confidence natural, her tone respectful but assertive as she answered every challenging question with sharp, well-thought answers that even Damien, in his ruthless scrutiny, could find no fault with, though a sour resentment simmered under his polished surface, whispering that no matter her excellence, she didn't belong in his pristine white world. But logic overpowered his prejudice because he needed the best, and Nia Morgan was undoubtedly the best. So he offered her the position of executive secretary on the spot, a move that earned him suspicious glances from his trusted board members who had long grown accustomed to the unspoken barriers Damien maintained. And as Nia accepted the job with a dazzling smile that made something uneasy twist in his chest, Damien told himself it was purely a business decision, purely efficiency, and nothing more. But as the weeks rolled into months, he found himself drawn unwillingly into the gravitational pull of her presence, noticing the subtle sway of her hips as she walked across his office, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, the melodic sound of her laughter filtering through the walls, and each time his attraction surged against his will, he punished himself with harsher distance, treating her with curt orders, clipped responses, eyes that never lingered more than necessary. And yet Nia responded to his coldness with effortless grace, never faltering, her work impeccable, her attitude professional, earning the admiration of every department she touched, while Damien battled a losing war within himself, pretending not to care when he caught glimpses of her chatting with other executives, pretending not to notice how the men in his company watched her with obvious appreciation. And it infuriated him beyond reason, a rage that had no rightful place, because what did he care if they looked at her, if she smiled at them, if she enjoyed lunches without inviting him? But he cared more than he admitted even to himself. And so he buried himself deeper in work, becoming even more ruthless in meetings, colder in decisions, until one evening when Nia stayed late to help finish a critical merger report, and Damien found himself standing silently at his office door, watching her as she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her brown skin glowing softly under the lamplight, her eyes intense with focus, her lips pressed together in concentration. And something inside Damien cracked, just a hairline fracture. But it was enough to jolt him into an unfamiliar state of vulnerability. So he snapped at her unnecessarily, making a harsh comment about a minor formatting error. And Nia's proud gaze locked onto his, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that said she saw right through him, saw the loneliness hidden beneath his pristine exterior, and Damien felt exposed in a way he hated, a way that made him lash out even more, retreating into his fortress of coldness. But Nia, bless her heart, didn't flinch, didn't let his rudeness chip away at her dignity. Instead, she apologized gracefully, corrected the mistake, and thanked him for his feedback, her voice calm, almost pitying, and that stung worse than any shouting match could have. So he turned away, pretending to be engrossed in paperwork as she gathered her things to leave. And when the door finally clicked shut behind her, Damien slumped in his chair, glaring at the ceiling as if blaming it for the storm brewing inside him, a storm he couldn't name, a war he wasn't ready to fight, a desire he refused to acknowledge, because to do so would be to admit that maybe, just maybe, Nia Morgan was more than a brilliant secretary, more than a beautiful face, more than the color of her skin that his ancestors had taught him to scorn. Maybe she was a human being whose spirit outshone anyone he had ever met, and that terrified Damien Wolfe far more than any hostile takeover or corporate threat ever could, because it threatened the very foundation of who he thought he was. And so, as the days stretched into weeks, and Nia's presence became an integral part of his life, Damien constructed even taller emotional walls, convincing himself he could resist whatever strange hold she had over him, telling himself he could keep things strictly professional. But every accidental touch, every stolen glance, every laugh she shared with someone else chipped away at his defenses until the brittle shell around his heart was no longer enough to contain the growing conflict within him. And somewhere deep down, a tiny voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was already too late, already too far gone, already falling for the one woman he had sworn he would never want. The pressure within Damien Wolfe had built to a breaking point, and when the company announced its annual gala, a night of mandatory celebration disguised as networking, Damien saw it as nothing more than a tedious exercise in forced smiles and meaningless chatter. But this year's gala was being held in Las Vegas, a decision made by the marketing team to reward employees for a record-breaking quarter. So he boarded the company jet with Nia Morgan and his top executives, trying to ignore the flutter in his chest when he saw her step onto the plane in a sleek crimson gown that clung to her every curve, her hair styled in soft waves that framed her breathtaking face. And he spent the flight drinking scotch and pretending to read financial reports as his mind betrayed him with visions he had no right to imagine. But upon arriving in Vegas, Damien forced himself into business mode, shaking hands, posing for photos, giving robotic speeches, while Nia floated through the evening like a goddess, charming everyone she met. And despite his iron will, Damien found himself gravitating toward her, seeking her out with casual excuses until the lines blurred and he was laughing at her jokes, leaning too close, breathing in her soft perfume that smelled like wildflowers and something far more dangerous. And the champagne flowed freely, glass after glass, numbing his tightly wound nerves until he was no longer aware of how much he drank. Only that Nia was laughing beside him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. And when someone jokingly suggested they all go to a chapel and get married for fun, Damien, in a haze of alcohol and buried longing, found himself daring Nia to come with him, expecting her to laugh it off. But to his shock, she smirked and accepted the challenge, and the next thing he knew, they were stumbling down the neon-lit streets, her hand warm in his, her laughter bubbling up like champagne in his veins, and it all felt so surreal, so liberating, that when they stood before the fake Elvis minister, and the man asked if they took each other to be husband and wife, Damien heard himself say, "I do," without hesitation, heard Nia's answering giggle, and soft "I do," as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And as they kissed to seal the ceremony, the chapel lights spinning around them in dizzying colors, Damien felt something shatter inside him, something raw and terrifying and beautiful. But when they stumbled back into the harsh light of morning, the glitter of Vegas replaced by pounding headaches and a cold, ugly reality. The marriage certificate clutched in Nia's trembling hands, Damien's blood ran ice-cold, because sober clarity hit him like a freight train, and he stared at the paper as if it were a death sentence, while Nia's horrified eyes met his, her full lips parted in shock, her entire body going rigid with disbelief, and for a long, terrible moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them louder than the bustling city outside, until Damien's fury erupted, directed not just at the absurd situation, but at himself for letting down the fortress he had spent a lifetime building, for letting one woman, this woman, crawl under his skin so deeply, and he lashed out with cutting words, blaming her for encouraging the drunken foolishness, accusing her of trapping him, accusations he knew were lies the moment they left his mouth. But the damage was done, and Nia flinched as if he had struck her, her face crumbling with a mixture of heartbreak and rage, before she gathered herself with a dignity that shamed him, straightening her shoulders and saying in a voice so calm it shook him, "We'll fix this, Mr. Wolfe," the formal address hitting him like a slap, and she turned away without another word, walking down the hallway of the luxury hotel with the grace of a queen, while Damien stood frozen, the marriage certificate still burning his hand, the weight of what they had done crashing over him in sickening waves, and though every instinct screamed at him to chase her, to apologize, to beg her forgiveness, the old broken part of him that had never learned how to love or trust or hope held him back. So he shoved the certificate into his pocket, marched back to his penthouse suite, and slammed the door behind him, vowing that he would fix this mistake no matter the cost, even if it meant burying whatever. Dangerous emotions had started to take root, even if it meant hurting her, because Damien Wolfe did not lose control, not for anyone, not even for the woman whose touch haunted him more vividly than any nightmare. Damien Wolfe spent the next several hours pacing the cold marble floors of his penthouse suite, mind-racing, heart-pounding, battling the crushing fear of public exposure, because news of his drunken marriage to his secretary would not just be personal humiliation, it would be a corporate disaster. The tabloids would rip him apart, investors would lose faith, board members would smell weakness, and Wolfe Enterprises, the empire he had sacrificed everything to build, would crumble under the weight of scandal. So he steeled himself, cold and ruthless as ever, dialing his lawyers and summoning his personal assistant to arrange a private meeting with Nia Morgan before the world found out. And when she arrived, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, her beautiful face devoid of makeup, but still devastatingly stunning, Damien felt a fresh stab of guilt that he crushed beneath the weight of necessity. Because there was no room for guilt in business, only survival. So he presented her with a thick contract, each page meticulously crafted to protect his assets, preserve his reputation, and trap her into a temporary marriage arrangement under strict conditions. No public affection, unless staged for appearances. No real intimacy beyond what was necessary for the cameras. No speaking to the press without his consent. And an ironclad non-disclosure agreement binding her silence forever. All in exchange for a generous financial compensation that Nia didn't even glance at, her trembling fingers flipping through the contract with growing horror as Damien explained in clipped, emotionless tones that this arrangement would last 6 months, long enough for the story to die down, for their relationship to appear legitimate, and then they would quietly divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, a clean break with minimal fallout, and Nia, who had spent the night wrestling with shame, fear, and a tattered sense of dignity, listened with a stoicism that belied the shattering inside her, because she understood, without Damien having to say it outright, that he saw her as a threat to his empire, a mistake to be contained. Not a woman who had shared a night of laughter and reckless dreams with him. And though every fiber of her being screamed at her to refuse, to walk away, to reclaim the shards of her pride and dignity, Nia also knew that walking away meant destruction. For herself, for the fragile career she had fought so hard to build, because no matter how unfair it was, she would be blamed. She would be painted as the seductress, the gold digger, the opportunist, and the thought of her parents, her community, her younger siblings, seeing those lies splattered across newsstands, made bile rise in her throat. So, with a heart heavier than lead, she picked up the silver pen Damien offered her, his hand steady, his face a mask of cold indifference, and signed her name on the dotted line. The scratch of the pen loud in the silent room, sealing her fate in ink and heartbreak, and for a brief, painful second their eyes met across the table, his gaze guarded but conflicted, hers full of quiet devastation, and something unspoken passed between them, a fleeting recognition of the wrongness of this moment. But it vanished as quickly as it came, buried beneath layers of pride and fear, and Damien, desperate to regain control over the situation and his own swirling emotions, stood abruptly, snapping the contract shut and handing it off to his assistant without another word, dismissing Nia with a curt nod as if she were no more than a business transaction finalized. And Nia rose on trembling legs, gathering the tattered remnants of her courage around her like a cloak as she walked out of the penthouse, the heavy door closing behind her, with a finality that echoed through the empty, sterile space, leaving Damien alone with the bitter taste of victory, wondering why the sight of her retreating figure felt less like salvation and more like losing something he never knew he needed. And as he poured himself another glass of scotch, staring out over the glittering Vegas skyline, Damien Wolfe told himself that this was the only way. That emotions had no place in his world, that by binding Nia with contracts and rules, he could keep her at arm's length, protect himself from the dangerous yearning clawing at the edges of his soul. But deep down, in the place he never dared to look, a small, treacherous voice whispered that it was already far too late for rules to save him. The ink barely dry on their forced agreement, Nia found herself standing in the grand marble foyer of Damien Wolfe's sprawling mansion, a fortress of glass, steel, and stone, perched high above the city, cold and imposing just like its owner. And as she dragged her suitcase across the polished floors, every step echoed like a reminder of how far out of her element she truly was, while Damien trailed behind her in silence, his face unreadable, his broad frame tense with barely concealed irritation. And though the housekeeper scurried to take her bags and show her to the guest room, because of course she wouldn't be sharing Damien's bed, not even for appearances unless necessary. Nia couldn't ignore the simmering tension that electrified the very air between them, a taut, thrumming current of anger, hurt, and something infinitely more dangerous. And as the first days unfolded under the same vast roof, the mansion became a battlefield of glances, clipped words, and accidental touches that burned like wildfire, their interactions laced with a volatile mix of resentment and raw attraction. They both pretended not to feel, and it didn't help that every hallway seemed designed to trap them together, every shared meal a test of endurance, with Damien issuing cold, impersonal commands like a king to his unwilling queen, while Nia responded with curt professionalism, her smile razor-sharp, her every movement a silent act of rebellion against the prison of gold and marble she now inhabited. But despite their mutual efforts to maintain the walls between them, the cracks began to show, first in the small moments, like when Nia reached for a coffee mug in the gleaming kitchen and Damien's hand brushed hers, the contact lingering half a second too long before they both jerked away, or when a sudden thunderstorm one evening knocked out the power and they found themselves fumbling together in the dark, laughter slipping free before either could stop it. A brief, beautiful reminder of the night they had laughed so easily under neon lights. Moments that neither of them dared to acknowledge in the harsh light of morning, instead retreating deeper into the cold comfort of their agreement. But tension simmered hotter with each passing day, their arguments growing sharper, their silences heavier, until one night, after a charity gala where they had been forced to play the happy couple for cameras, Damien slammed the mansion door behind them, tearing off his tie in frustration as Nia whirled on him, her eyes blazing with fury, and the explosion they had both been holding back finally ignited. Their words cutting deep, old resentments and hidden fears erupting like lava. Nia accusing him of treating her like a pawn, Damien snarling that she had trapped him into a life he never wanted. But beneath the fury, their bodies betrayed them, drawing closer with every shouted accusation, until they stood mere inches apart, breathing hard, eyes locked in a battle neither dared to end, and for one dizzying heartbeat, it seemed they might crash into each other, might give in to the pull that neither contracts nor pride could erase. But at the last second, Damien turned away, fists clenched at his sides, retreating once again behind his walls, while Nia swallowed down the ache in her chest and retreated to her cold, lonely guest room, the space between them thick with all the words they could not say. And as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Damien pacing in his study down the hall, Nia realized with a sinking heart that living under the same roof was not just eroding their carefully constructed distance, it was tearing down the barriers around her own heart. And no matter how fiercely she clung to her pride, she was already falling for a man who saw her as nothing more than a problem to manage, a risk to neutralize. And yet in the dark, in the quiet moments between arguments, she had seen glimpses of something else, something wounded and yearning behind his icy exterior, something that called to her with a voice older and deeper than reason. And though she told herself she hated him, that she despised every cruel word he threw her way, a traitorous part of her longed to be the one to touch the broken pieces he hid so well, to prove to them both that love was not a weakness, but a strength. But for now, Nia Morgan could only tighten her grip on the edges of her lonely heart and brace herself for the war she had unwittingly stepped into. A war she was no longer sure she wanted to win. The uneasy truce that had settled over the Wolfe mansion after their last explosive argument began to crack again when a series of public appearances forced Damien and Nia to act like the golden couple the media so desperately wanted them to be, and at each charity gala, corporate dinner, and art exhibition, Nia dazzled in stunning gowns tailored to perfection, her radiant beauty and magnetic presence drawing the attention of every man in the room like moths to a flame. And though Damien wore his usual mask of cold indifference, an unfamiliar burn twisted in his chest each time he caught someone else looking at her with hunger or admiration. Each lingering glance at the way her dress hugged her curves, or the way her laughter lit up her face, stoked a fire inside him that he refused to name. A savage possessiveness that had no place in a relationship built on contracts and lies. But the more he tried to suppress it, the worse it grew. Until one evening at a black tie fundraiser, when a young tech billionaire got a little too close, laughing at Nia's jokes, touching her arm as if he had every right. Damien saw red and crossed the room in 3 strides, inserting himself between them with a hand possessively curling around Nia's waist, a territorial move that startled both Nia and the tech billionaire. But Damien didn't care, couldn't care, because the thought of anyone else touching her made something primal roar in his veins. And though Nia smiled politely and played the role of the dutiful wife for the watching cameras, her eyes flashed with a mixture of confusion and something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. And later, as they drove home in silence, the tension between them stretched taut and shimmering, vibrating with unsaid words and forbidden desires. But even as Damien grappled with the messy tangle of emotions he didn't want to understand, Nia was fighting her own battle, because while rummaging through a forgotten library on the 3rd floor of the mansion, she stumbled upon a dusty old photo album tucked behind a row of first edition books, and curiosity got the better of her, leading to the discovery of a collection of photographs and letters that painted a heartbreaking portrait of Damien's childhood, a childhood marked by loss, cruelty, and deep-seated hatred, planted not by nature, but by nurture, because buried among the smiling pictures of a much younger Damien were the harsh, chilling letters from his late father, a man whose words dripped with racism, elitism, and the cold demand for perfection. Letters that praised Damien only when he was cold and ruthless, and punished him mercilessly when he showed kindness or emotion. And as Nia sat there on the thick Persian rug, the heavy album open in her lap, tears blurred her vision at the realization that Damien's icy heart had been forged in a furnace of cruelty, that his disdain for people like her wasn't truly born of his own soul, but rather hammered into him by a father who taught him that love was weakness, and that anyone who didn't fit his narrow mold of power and privilege was a threat to be destroyed. And with that understanding came a deep, aching sadness, because for the first time she truly saw the broken boy behind the hard, merciless man, saw the pain he carried like a hidden wound that festered beneath his designer suits and cold glares. And though she knew she should hate him for the things he had said, the things he had thought, she found herself instead aching for him, aching for the child who had never been given a chance to choose his own path. And yet the knowledge filled her with a new kind of fear, too, because it meant that saving Damien, if he even wanted to be saved, would take more than just tenderness or time. It would take a war against the very foundations of who he believed himself to be. And she didn't know if she was strong enough to win that battle without losing herself in the process. But as she closed the album with trembling hands and wiped her tears away before Damien could return, Nia made a silent vow to herself. She would not pity him. She would not become another caretaker for his wounds. But if there was even the smallest part of him that wanted more, that wanted to believe in love and hope and something beyond the cold legacy his father left behind, she would fight for that spark, even if it broke her heart, even if it cost her everything. And as she stood and returned the album to its hiding place, footsteps echoed down the hallway, and she knew their uneasy dance was far from over. It was only just beginning. The tension between them lingered heavy in the air over the next few days, unspoken truths curling like smoke between stolen glances and hesitant touches. And as evening fell one restless night, a violent thunderstorm rolled over the hills, lightning slashing the sky, while the mansion trembled under the roar of the heavens. And when the power inevitably flickered and died, plunging them into a deep, echoing darkness, it was almost as if the universe itself demanded that Damien and Nia confront what neither had dared to voice. So, with the storm raging outside and no distractions left to hide behind, Damien retrieved a few old candles from a forgotten cabinet, their warm, flickering glow softening the harsh edges of the mansion's cold architecture, casting shadows that danced along the walls. And with a hesitant, almost boyish awkwardness, he found her curled up in the grand living room, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth, her beautiful face lit in gold and shadow. And for a long, suspended moment, neither of them moved, simply breathing in the crackling silence between thunderclaps, until Damien, heart pounding against the prison of his ribs, sat down beside her, close enough to feel the heat of her body, but not quite touching. And they talked, truly talked, their words tentative at first, but growing braver with each confession, each vulnerable glance, peeling back the layers of pain, fear, pride, until it felt like they were naked, without ever shedding a stitch of clothing. And Damien, who had built his life on strength and control, found himself admitting the things he had never dared say aloud, the loneliness, the fear of being seen as weak, the echoes of his father's voice that haunted him still. And Nia, tears glistening in her wide, beautiful eyes, listened not with pity, but with fierce, aching understanding, her hand reaching out to cover his where it trembled on the sofa between them. A touch so tender, so grounding, that it undid him completely, and without thinking, without planning. Damien cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a kiss that was not frantic or demanding, but reverent, full of apology and wonder and longing, his mouth moving against hers with a desperate gentleness that spoke all the things he didn't know how to say. And Nia kissed him back with a soft, broken sound, her fingers tangling in his hair, anchoring him to this moment, this truth. And when they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, the world felt changed, smaller and infinitely more precious. So Damien, needing to be near her, needing to give her something real for once, led her upstairs through the candle-lit halls to his bedroom, not with the urgency of lust, but the tenderness of a man offering up his battered heart. And there, in the soft glow of stormlight and candle flame, they simply held each other at first. Damien pressing kisses to her forehead, her hands smoothing over his back in soothing circles, the heat between them simmering slow and sweet until they lay tangled together atop the bed, fully clothed, but more intimately connected than if they had been bare, sharing whispered dreams, stolen smiles, and endless kisses that deepened and softened with every heartbeat. And Damien found himself memorizing the feel of her skin beneath his fingertips, the sound of her laughter, the way her eyes closed when he brushed her hair back from her face, while Nia marveled at the vulnerability in his touch, the way he trembled slightly when she ran her hands over his shoulders, the raw, unguarded hunger in his gaze that spoke not just of desire, but of need, deep and aching and real. And as the storm raged on outside, inside the room it was quiet except for the soft rustle of sheets, the low hum of their voices, the brush of lips against skin, a symphony of trust and discovery that wrapped around them like a second skin. And though nothing was rushed, nothing was forced, the night unfolded like a slow-burning fire, tender and consuming, healing and breaking them both open, until Damien cradled her against his chest, his hand stroking her back in lazy, reverent patterns, and whispered things he never thought he would say. Promises not of forever, not yet, but of honesty, of trying, of fighting against the shadows in his soul for the chance to be worthy of her light. And Nia, overwhelmed but fiercely hopeful, pressed a kiss to his chest and whispered that she would fight too, that maybe broken people could build something unbreakable together. And as sleep finally pulled them under, their bodies twined together in a perfect, imperfect knot, the storm outside began to die away, leaving only the steady, fragile rhythm of two hearts learning to beat as one in the soft, forgiving dark. The fragile peace and new tenderness that had blossomed between Damien and Nia after their stormy, soul-bearing night was quickly tested when the past came crashing into their lives with the force of a wrecking ball, because just as Damien found himself daring to imagine a future unshackled by his old demons, his ex-girlfriend, Victoria Langston, a statuesque blonde with ice in her veins and ambition sharper than knives, returned to town, slithering into Damien's world under the pretense of friendship, but with venom hidden behind every painted smile, and she wasted no time planting seeds of doubt, weaving poisonous lies with casual cruelty, whispering in Damien's ear that Nia had only married him for his fortune, that the accidental Vegas wedding was no accident at all, but a carefully calculated trap laid by a gold digger who saw a lonely, wounded billionaire as easy prey. And though Damien at first scoffed at the idea, brushing off Victoria's insinuations with cold disdain, her words wormed into the cracks of his deepest fears, exploiting the raw places he had only just begun to expose to Nia. And as Victoria artfully reminded him of all the betrayals he had endured, all the people who had used him or abandoned him once they got what they wanted, the old walls he had started to tear down began to rise again, brick by painful brick, until Damien found himself questioning every look, every touch, every soft word shared with Nia in the storm-lit dark, and confusion twisted inside him like a living thing, warring with the part of him that had seen the truth in Nia's eyes, that had felt her honesty in the way she touched him. But fear, that ancient, vicious enemy, whispered louder, drowning out reason. And when Damien stumbled upon a private moment where Nia was on the phone with her best friend, laughing about how unbelievable her life had become, his poisoned mind twisted the innocent words into confirmation of his worst suspicions, and instead of confronting her with his doubts, instead of trusting the bond they had begun to build, Damien pulled away, retreating into coldness and suspicion, treating her once again, not like a partner, but like an adversary. And Nia, bewildered by the sudden shift, felt the distance like a blade against her skin, though she had no idea why the warmth in his eyes had turned to ice, or why his touches had grown mechanical and rare. And as the days passed, the mansion became a prison once more, filled with strained silences and brittle courtesies, the air so thick with unspoken pain that it became hard to breathe. And when Damien finally confronted her, his words were not questions, but accusations, sharp and cutting, hurling Victoria's lies at her as if they were gospel. And Nia, heart shattering with every cruel syllable, realized that the man who had once held her with such reverence now saw her through the distorted lens of fear and betrayal. And though she fought to explain, to make him see the truth, that she had never wanted his money, that she had signed the marriage contract with nothing but her dignity and sorrow in her hands, Damien's heart was a fortress once more, impenetrable and cold, and the more she pleaded, the colder he grew, until Nia, dignity bleeding from 1,000 invisible wounds, straightened her spine, wiped her tears with trembling fingers, and turned away, refusing to beg for love from a man who chose to believe lies over the evidence of his own heart. And as she packed her few belongings in the dead of night, the mansion that had once begun to feel almost like home loomed over her like a tomb, empty and echoing. And though Damien stood at the window, watching her car pull away with an ache so fierce it stole his breath, he said nothing, did nothing, trapped by pride and fear and the ghosts of a past he hadn't yet learned to bury. And so the distance between them grew not from lack of love, but from too much hurt. And as the night swallowed Nia's car into darkness, Damien whispered her name into the empty room, a prayer and a curse all at once, not knowing if he had just made the greatest mistake of his life. The cold silence that fell over the Wolfe mansion after Nia's departure was suffocating, a crushing void that wrapped its icy fingers around Damien's throat and squeezed tighter with each passing day. And though he told himself 1,000 times that he had done the right thing, that trusting someone like Nia had been foolish, that she had played him for a fool. The words rang hollow in the cavernous emptiness of the home they had briefly shared, echoing back at him with a mockery so sharp it made his skin crawl, because no matter how he tried to bury it, no matter how he tried to drown it in the endless hours of work, meaningless meetings, or late-night whiskies that burned his throat raw, the truth gnawed at him. The truth that her absence hurt more than anything he had ever known. A raw, gaping wound he couldn't close, couldn't numb, and every time he walked past the rooms she had touched with her laughter, the rooms that still smelled faintly of her soft perfume, Damien felt a fresh, searing stab of regret that curdled into self-loathing, a toxic brew that fueled his descent into rage and isolation. So he lashed out at everyone around him, firing staff members for imagined slights, snapping at his board of directors with cold fury, driving his assistant to tears, and locking himself away from the world behind steel walls of anger. But the harder he tried to silence the ache, the louder it screamed, haunting him in every quiet moment, in every broken dream where he saw her turning away from him, her eyes filled with hurt he had put there, her voice trembling as she said goodbye. And even though he wanted to blame her, to cling to the lie that she had betrayed him, deep down, Damien knew with a bone-deep certainty that left him hollow, that it was he who had betrayed her. He who had let fear and pride and old wounds destroy something fragile and precious before it had even had the chance to truly bloom, and the realization shredded what little remained of his composure, sending him into a spiral of destructive habits he hadn't indulged in for years. Nights spent drinking alone until he couldn't remember his own name, mornings where he barely dragged himself out of bed, existing in a haze of bitterness and regret. And though Victoria continued to circle him like a vulture, offering false comfort, Damien saw her now for exactly what she was, a poison he had once mistaken for medicine. But it didn't matter, because the only person whose presence he craved, whose voice he longed to hear cutting through the darkness, was gone, and each day without Nia stretched longer and colder, until it felt as if the mansion itself was grieving, the grand halls and glittering chandeliers standing as hollow monuments to a happiness that had slipped through his fingers like smoke. And though Damien tried to tell himself that time would heal it, that the pain would fade, the truth was that time only sharpened it, honed it into a blade that sliced deeper with every empty hour. And so he existed, not living, but merely surviving, a hollow shell of the ruthless billionaire he had once been, haunted by the memory of a woman who had shown him what it meant to be truly seen, truly cared for. And though he would never admit it aloud, deep in the shattered remains of his heart, Damien knew that no amount of power, no fortune, no hollow victories would ever fill the space Nia had left behind. The days bled into weeks, and Damien's hollow existence continued, the fire that once fueled him dwindling to cold embers, until one afternoon, buried beneath the monotony of another meaningless board meeting, his world shifted without warning, beginning when an urgent call from his head of security dragged him out of his fog with words that sliced through his apathy like a blade, and Damien, more irritated than concerned, stalked into the security office, expecting another minor inconvenience, only to find himself staring at a mountain of evidence, photographs, emails, recordings, all meticulously compiled into a damning portrait of corporate sabotage that had been orchestrated right under his nose, and worse, the documents revealed that Victoria Langston had been at the heart of it, not only poisoning his mind against Nia, but actively working with a rival company to destabilize Wolfe Enterprises, a revelation so staggering that Damien's legs nearly gave out beneath him. But what shattered him completely was the final file the security chief slid across the table. A dossier that proved, without any shadow of doubt, that Nia had discovered the plot weeks ago, had been working tirelessly and in secret to protect him, to protect his company, shielding him from betrayal even as he questioned her loyalty, even as he shattered her trust, and as Damien read through emails she had sent to anonymous tip lines, recordings of her warning employees to be cautious, and notes she had kept about suspicious activities, all while never saying a word to him, never asking for credit, never seeking anything for herself. The weight of his mistake came crashing down on him with merciless clarity, and Damien found himself reeling, staggering back from the table as the room spun around him, because every cruel word he had thrown at her, every moment he had doubted her, now stood as damning testimony against the man he had become, a man too blinded by fear to see the truth standing right in front of him, and the memory of her eyes, wide and wounded as he accused her of things she had never even thought of doing, burned into his soul, searing him with guilt so profound it left him gasping for breath, and rage, white-hot and vicious, tore through him, not at Nia, but at himself, at Victoria, at every single demon he had allowed to control him. And without hesitation, Damien ordered Victoria's immediate arrest, his voice like steel, his hands trembling with the force of his fury. And as the authorities led her away, her screams and protests bouncing off the marble walls, Damien felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a desperate, aching need to make things right. And for the first time in his life, Damien Wolfe understood what it meant to be utterly, devastatingly in love. Because Nia had loved him, truly loved him, even when he didn't deserve it, even when he had given her every reason to walk away. And now, standing amidst the wreckage of his own making, Damien knew, with bone-deep certainty, that if he ever wanted to know the warmth of her smile again, the touch of her hand, the sound of her laughter, he would have to fight for her with every piece of his battered soul. And so, heart hammering against his ribs, Damien set out, not as the cold, ruthless billionaire he had once been, but as a man willing to tear down kingdoms and cross oceans to earn back the heart he had so carelessly broken, vowing that he would not stop, would not rest, until Nia Morgan knew, beyond doubt, beyond fear, that she was loved, cherished, and wanted, not for what she could offer, not for what she had done, but for exactly who she was. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Damien raced against time, every second stretching out before him like an endless horizon. And though the bitter taste of his past mistakes still clung to his mouth, a newfound urgency fueled him, propelling him forward as his heart pounded louder than the engine of his sleek sports car tearing through the city streets, because Damien had only just come to understand what it meant to love, what it meant to truly feel the depths of a connection. And it was only now, in the aftermath of his reckoning, that he realized just how much Nia had become the center of his world, the anchor he had never known he needed. And though she was the one he had hurt, she was also the one who had taught him how to open up, how to trust, how to be vulnerable. And now, with the weight of all his mistakes crashing down on him. He knew he had to fight for her. He had to make amends before it was too late, before she slipped away for good. And as he sped through the streets of the city, the air outside cold against his skin, Damien's mind flashed back to the countless moments they had shared, moments that now felt like precious, fragile memories, like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known how to put together until now, when everything seemed to hinge on one last chance, one final opportunity to prove to Nia that he had learned, that he was capable of being the man she had always deserved. And his thoughts raced faster than the car as he remembered the way she had stood by him, the way her love had never faltered, even when he had been cruel, even when he had shut her out, and it made his chest ache with regret. The pain of knowing that the one person who had believed in him had been the one he had pushed away, and every second spent in his car felt like an eternity. His nerves coiled tight, his body on edge, and when he finally reached the apartment complex where Nia had been staying since leaving him, he slammed the car into park and rushed up the stairs, without a second thought, his mind racing ahead of his feet, the thought of losing her propelling him with the force of a tidal wave. And when he reached her door, standing there in front of it, with his heart hammering like a drumbeat in his chest, Damien almost couldn't breathe, almost couldn't bring himself to knock, because the fear of rejection, the fear of her turning him away, was almost too much to bear. But then, remembering the pain he had caused her, the distance he had forced between them, Damien finally knocked, not just on her door, but on the door of his own heart, praying that the woman who had always seen him for who he truly was would still want to see him now. And when Nia opened the door, her eyes red and puffy from crying, her face still beautiful, but marred by the sadness he had put there, Damien's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment neither of them spoke, as the weight of everything unsaid hung between them, thick and suffocating. But finally, Damien took a step forward, his voice low and raw, and all the words he had been holding back poured out in a rush. "Nia, I don't have any excuse for what I did. I hurt you, and I betrayed you. But in the worst way possible, I didn't see you for who you really were until it was almost too late, and I can't change what happened. But please, let me try to make it right. I love you, Nia. I love you, and I know I've been a fool. But I'll spend every day for the rest of my life proving it to you if you'll just give me the chance." And as his words hung in the air between them, Damien held his breath, afraid that the door would close on him, that she would walk away and leave him with nothing but the ghost of a love that had slipped through his fingers. But then, Nia, with tears streaming down her cheeks, reached out and touched his face, her fingers trembling as she whispered the words he had longed to hear. "I love you too, Damien, but you have to understand, I can't just forgive everything so easily. I need to know you're really willing to change, to be the man I thought you could be, not the man I feared you were." And in that moment, Damien knew with everything inside him that he was willing to do anything, to earn back her trust, to show her that he could be the man she had believed in, the man she deserved. And as the storm between them began to settle, as their hands intertwined once more, the world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for them to decide the future of their love. And in that moment, Damien made a promise, not just to Nia, but to himself. That no matter what happened next, he would fight for her with every last ounce of his being, because this love was worth every sacrifice, every ounce of pain, every moment of uncertainty. And as Nia closed the door behind him and led him back inside, where the rest of their story was still waiting to be written, Damien knew that the hardest part was over, and though their journey ahead wouldn't be easy, they were no longer two broken souls. They were a new beginning, and that was all that mattered. The tension in the air was palpable as Damien stood there at the bustling airport, his eyes scanning the crowd for the one person who could make or break everything. Nia. The terminal, filled with the sound of hurried footsteps and boarding calls, felt distant, like a world apart, as Damien's heart thudded in his chest, each beat growing heavier with the weight of what he was about to do. He had been chasing this moment for so long, had driven himself to this point where nothing else mattered but the truth. His truth, the raw and painful reality of his past, and the love that he had only just begun to comprehend. When he finally spotted her, standing near the gate, a suitcase in hand, her back turned to him as she stared out at the plane, Damien's breath caught in his throat. She looked so strong, so resolute, yet there was a softness about her, a vulnerability that broke him even further. She wasn't running, she wasn't trying to escape him, but he could feel the distance between them like an unbridgeable chasm, and the pain in his chest threatened to consume him as he stepped forward, moving through the crowd like a man who had nothing left to lose. When she turned, their eyes locked, and for a brief, excruciating moment, neither of them moved, neither of them said a word. And then, with a look that held both determination and sorrow, Nia spoke first, her voice soft, yet firm. "Damien, please don't. You've done enough damage. I'm leaving, and there's nothing you can say that will change that." But the words, though they stung, didn't stop him. They only drove him further, deep into the well of emotions he had kept buried for so long. His own voice, raw and desperate, finally broke through, trembling with emotion as he took a step closer, his hands shaking slightly. "Nia, please, I need you to listen. I know you're angry, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't let you walk away without telling you the truth. I need you to know who I really am. I've been running from myself, from the mistakes of my past, hiding behind my wealth, my power, my arrogance. I hurt people because I thought that was the only way to survive, and I kept everyone at arm's length because I was afraid of being vulnerable, of being weak. But then you came into my life, and I saw in you everything I had been too afraid to acknowledge in myself: courage, strength, and a kind of love that I didn't believe I deserved. You changed me, Nia, whether I was ready for it or not. And I messed up. I pushed you away when I should have held you closer. I doubted you when you never once gave me a reason to. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all the pain I caused you, for the lies, for not seeing you for who you really are. But you need to understand. I love you. I love you with everything I have, and I've never felt this way about anyone before." The words, so raw and vulnerable, hung in the air between them, and for a moment all the noise of the airport seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of Damien's heartbeat in his ears. Nia stood frozen, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, her eyes wide, glistening with the threat of tears she fought to hold back. She had expected anger, perhaps more blame, maybe even cruelty. But this was different. This was real, and it shook her to the core. But still, she held back, her pride clashing with the tenderness of his confession. Damien, you don't get it. You've shattered me. You've taken everything I trusted, everything I believed in, and you trampled all over it. You left me to pick up the pieces of a love that wasn't real, that wasn't even what you said it was. You let your fear control you, and pushed me away, even when all I wanted was to be there for you. I've loved you. I've always loved you. But I can't keep living in the shadow of your mistakes. I need something more than apologies and promises that might just be words. I need to see that you've truly changed, that you're not just chasing a love you think you deserve, but the kind of love you're ready to fight for, she said, her voice wavering with the force of her own emotions, the tears threatening to spill over. Damien stepped closer, his hand reaching out, but stopping just before touching her, as if afraid she might shatter if he got too close. Nia, I know I don't deserve you, not yet, but I will spend every single day proving to you that I'm worth it. I'll show you, with every action, with every choice I make, that I'm ready to fight for us. I don't care what it takes. I don't care if I have to tear down every wall I've built, just to earn back your trust. I love you. I need you. And I won't let you walk away from me. Not when I know I've finally found what I was looking for my entire life. Nia's breath caught in her throat as she fought to keep the tears at bay, the weight of his words crashing over her like a storm. And for the first time, she allowed herself to soften, to acknowledge the depth of the love she still had for him. The pain, though still there, felt more like a wound in the process of healing. She took a step closer, her voice quiet, but filled with resolve. Damien, I can't just forget everything. I can't pretend that what happened doesn't matter. But I'll try. I'll try to trust you again. I'll try to believe that you're the man you say you are now. But you have to show me. You have to prove it to me, not with words, but with your actions, every single day. And in that moment, Damien knew that this wasn't just a promise. It was a chance, the only chance he had, to show her that he was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild what they had lost, one step at a time. As Nia stepped into his arms, her body trembling with emotion, he whispered the only thing that mattered in that moment. I will, Nia. I promise you. I will. The sun shone brightly over the lush grounds of the estate, casting a golden glow over the beautiful garden, where the most significant day of their lives was about to unfold. The air was thick with anticipation as guests, once distant strangers to their love, gathered in quiet reverence, admiring the transformation of the man who had once stood so cold and untouchable, Damien Wolfe. It was almost impossible to reconcile the hardened billionaire of the past with the man standing at the altar now, his heart laid bare and his soul finally at peace. Today wasn't just a celebration of a wedding, but a testament to growth, redemption, and most of all, love. Damien stood tall, his tuxedo sharp, and his expression filled with a quiet, joyful confidence he had never known before. The weight of his past mistakes no longer hanging around his neck like a shackle, but rather like a distant memory, something he had learned from, something that had shaped him into who he was today. His eyes scanned the gathering crowd, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to impress, didn't feel the need to maintain the image of a ruthless billionaire who had everything. Today, he only cared about one thing, one person. And that was Nia. As the soft music began to play, his heart quickened in his chest, and all at once the world felt like it was slowing down, as if every beat of the music was in rhythm with the pounding of his heart. Each step she took toward him a reminder of how far they had come, how much they had fought for each other, and how much they still had ahead of them. And when Nia stepped into view, her breathtaking beauty taking his breath away all over again, his entire world shifted. The only thing that mattered now was her. She walked toward him, her gown flowing like liquid silk, her face glowing with a mixture of joy, excitement, and the deep, profound love they had finally reclaimed together. She had forgiven him. She had opened her heart again. And today, they were both ready to embrace a future neither of them had ever thought possible. Every step Nia took was filled with grace, but also with strength. The strength of a woman who had endured heartbreak, the strength of a woman who had refused to give up on love. And now, standing before Damien, it was clear to everyone that she was not just a beautiful woman, but the heart and soul of everything they had fought for. As she reached him at the altar, her eyes locked with his, and Damien could see it in her gaze, a mixture of trust, forgiveness, and a quiet understanding that they were no longer the people they had been when they first met. They had come so far, and they had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about growth, about fighting for one another, about being willing to break down walls and rebuild from the ground up. The ceremony was simple, but filled with meaning, each vow exchanged not as a promise of an ideal future, but as a commitment to always strive for each other, to face challenges together, and to never stop loving. When Damien slipped the ring onto Nia's finger, his voice trembled as he spoke the words that felt truer than anything he had ever said before. I promise to love you, for all that you are, for all that you've been, and for all that we will become. I will never take you for granted again, and I will spend every day making sure you know how much you mean to me. And when Nia responded, her voice strong yet tender, I promise to love you, to support you, and to stand by your side no matter what comes our way. I will love you through the hard times, and I will cherish every moment of our journey together. As they exchanged their vows, the crowd watched in silent admiration, and the realization hit both of them. They weren't just two people getting married. They were two souls, broken and rebuilt, standing side by side as equals, as partners, as lovers who had fought for their love, no matter the obstacles. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the world seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, and Damien pulled Nia into his arms, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that sealed their promises, a kiss that spoke of all the pain, all the heartache, all the joy that had brought them to this moment. As they pulled away, Damien looked into her eyes with a smile that reached deep into his soul, and for the first time in his life, he was truly free. Free of his past, free of his regrets, and free to love without fear. The reception that followed was filled with laughter, dancing, and the kind of joy that only comes when two people know they have finally found the home in each other. Damien, once a man defined by his wealth and power, now stood as a man who had everything. The love of a woman who had shown him what truly mattered. His gaze never left Nia's. His heart never strayed from the path they had chosen together. And as they danced under the stars, surrounded by friends and family. The world outside seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them. Two people who had come through the fire and emerged stronger, more whole, and ready for whatever came next. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of promise, and Damien knew one thing with absolute certainty. With Nia by his side, they could face anything. As the night drew to a close and their guests began to leave, Damien and Nia stood together, hand in hand, knowing that the love they shared wasn't just a fairy tale. It was real, it was hard-earned, and it was theirs. "We made it," Damien whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We made it," Nia echoed, her voice trembling, but full of hope. And in that moment, they knew true love had won. They were no longer just two people. They were a family, a team, a love story that had begun in pain, but had blossomed into something beautiful, something eternal. Together, they would face the world, and together, they would always be enough.